All right, so you want to unlock fluency in English, huh? Well, we're going to dive deep into a method that might just be the key. It's called Charlie Way. And the fascinating thing is we're learning about it through a Spanish language video.
Yeah.
Yeah, you heard that right. Spanish, it's all about thinking outside the box, right?
Yeah. What's really intriguing here is that Charlie, the creator of this method, he really takes traditional English learning to task. He doesn't mince words.
Oh, really?
He calls it horrible.
Wow. He doesn't hold back. So what makes him so critical of traditional methods? What's his beef?
Well, he argues that they treat English like it's phonetic, similar to Spanish. And that sets learners up for a world of difficulty.
I see.
And his big idea is that English should be mechanized.
Mechanized?
Meaning you focus on the sounds before you even touch grammar.
Mechanized, huh? That sounds almost like we're building a robot, not learning a language. Can you break that down a bit further for me?
Yeah, think of it like learning to play the piano. You wouldn't jump into complex concertos without first mastering the scales and chords, right?
Right.
It's about training your vocal cords to produce sounds automatically. Almost like building muscle memory.
Okay, so it's less about rules and more about getting the feel of the language, like finding the rhythm.
Exactly. And this is where the differences between Spanish and English really come into play. English has 48 distinct sounds.
Wow.
While Spanish has around 30.
Oh, wow.
So that's 18 new sounds you have to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Which can be quite a challenge.
18 new sounds. Wow. I can see why English pronunciation can be such a hurdle for Spanish speakers. Are there any examples in the video that illustrate these differences?
Absolutely. One example is how the is in phrases like what is it sounds more like is when spoken by native speakers.
Oh, you're totally right. It's so subtle that I never even noticed it.
Right.
But that's exactly how I say it.
And another great example is that softer ors sound at the end of words like brother, sister, or paper.
Sigue con tu aprendizaje del inglés con Audible. Mejora tu pronunciación y vocabulario con miles de audiolibros narrados por hablantes nativos. Prueba Audible gratis por 30 días usando el enlace en la descripción.
It's almost like a quick flick of your tongue against the roof of your mouth.
I've never thought about it that way. Those tiny details can make a huge difference in sounding natural, can't they?
Absolutely. That's why Charlie emphasizes mastering these sounds as the foundation for fluency. It's like building a house.
Right.
You need a strong foundation before you can add the roof and all the fancy details.
Okay, so we've got our foundation of sounds down. What's the next building block on this path to fluency?
This is where things get really interesting. Connecting words in speech. This is another key difference between Spanish and English that can really trip up learners.
You mean how English speakers sometimes blend words together? I've heard non-native speakers mention that.
Exactly. We constantly contract words and phrases.
Yeah.
Which can sound like a completely different language to someone learning English.
Oh, I bet.
The video calls this connecting words in speech. And it's a skill that has to be learned, not just picked up through osmosis.
Right. Now that you mention it, I can definitely see how that would be confusing. Could you give us a few examples of these connected speech patterns?
Of course. One common example is don't you, which often becomes don't you in casual conversation.
Don't you? Right.
Another one is see you, morphing into see ya. And then there's how a T at the end of a word will often link with a vowel sound at the beginning of the next word. So that apple can become that tapple.
Wow. It's like a whole secret code that native speakers just instinctively know.
That's a great way to put it. And learning to crack this code can be a game changer when it comes to understanding fast, natural English speech.
Okay. All right. So we've covered mastering sounds and connecting words in speech. What's the next level in Charlie's fluency framework?
He calls it beautifying sentences.
Beautifying sentences. I like that. It sounds much more elegant than just plain old grammar.
It's about using more sophisticated vocabulary and expressions to elevate your English.
Oh, okay.
Think of it as adding those finishing touches to a painting that make it truly captivating.
So it's like taking your English beyond the functional and adding some flair.
Exactly. By incorporating this richer language, you can actually sound more fluent and advanced than you might actually be.
You mentioned earlier that you're prepping for job interviews.
Right.
Imagine using phrases like nevertheless or however instead of just relying on but. It could really elevate your responses and make you stand out.
Absolutely.
Now that's a strategy I can get behind. Do you have any examples of these beautifying phrases in action? Maybe comparing Spanish and English?
Absolutely. In Spanish, you might use phrases like sin embargo, no obstante, or por ende, instead of simply saying pero.
Ah, I see. Yeah, those phrases definitely add a touch of class. What are some comparable examples in English?
You could use however or nevertheless instead of just relying on but or in addition instead of simply and.
This is making me realize how much impact choosing the right words can have on how you come across.
It really does. And this can be especially helpful in formal settings like those job interviews or presentations where you want to make a strong impression.
So we've covered mastering sounds, connecting words, and beautifying sentences. What's the final piece of this fluency puzzle?
It's what many learners consider the holy grail, sounding native.
Ah, yes, that elusive goal of speaking so naturally that people can't even tell it's not your first language. But how do you go beyond textbook phrases and actually start to sound like a native speaker?
It comes down to mastering those colloquial expressions and slang terms that you rarely find in textbooks.
Right, those everyday phrases and idioms that can make you scratch your head even if you have a decent grasp of grammar.
Right.
What are some examples that come to mind?
One that often trips up non-native speakers is to figure out,
Okay,
which means to solve a problem or come to a conclusion.
that's a good one. It's such a common phrase, but not one you'd necessarily learn in a formal setting. It's definitely something you pick up through real-world exposure.
Another example is the word stuff, which is used all the time as a more casual substitute for things.
You're so right. Stuff is everywhere. It's so versatile, but probably pretty confusing for someone trying to learn English from a textbook.
I can imagine it would be. And it probably gets frustrating for learners when these seemingly simple words are used so often in daily conversation.
So we've explored these 4 key skills: mastering sounds, connecting words and speech, beautifying sentences, and sounding native.
Right.
But how does Charlie suggest we actually develop these skills? Is that where his practical strategies come in?
Exactly. The Charlie way includes 4 practical strategies designed to target each skill. And the best part is that they're all things you can do at home at your own pace.
And that sounds promising. I'm eager to hear more about these strategies. Let's dive in.
So the first strategy is called double repetition.
Double repetition. Okay, tell me more.
It's all about harnessing the power of repetition, which is really fundamental to learning anything new.
Yeah.
Charlie's twist is that he suggests repeating phrases twice consistently for 5 days. This helps to really cement those phrases in your memory and internalize the sounds and structure.
So it's about going beyond just hearing or reading a phrase and really drilling it into your brain until it becomes second nature.
Precisely. The video gives the example of learning translations for everyday words. You write them down, create a few sentences with each word, and repeat those sentences diligently for 5 days straight.
I can see how that would be super effective for building vocabulary and solidifying pronunciation. What's the next strategy?
The second strategy is called the sing-along method,
Sing-along method.
which might sound a little unconventional,
About.
but it's incredibly effective.
Sing-along method. Okay, I'm definitely picturing myself belting out English phrases in the shower now.
Well, it's not quite karaoke night, but it does involve using your voice. It's about replicating the articulation and intonation of native speakers by echoing audio while really exaggerating your mouth movements.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about mimicking the words, but actually training your mouth to move in the right way. Why is that exaggeration so important?
It's all about muscle memory. By exaggerating those movements, you're essentially training your mouth muscles to produce the sounds correctly. And over time, it becomes more natural and effortless.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you're teaching your mouth a whole new way to move.
The third strategy is the pronunciation technique.
So this is where we really zero in on those tricky English sounds we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It involves targeted exercises that focus on specific sounds. For example, you might practice distinguishing between the Z sound and the S sound, repeating them back to back to really get a feel for how they're produced.
That seems especially helpful for those sounds that don't exist in your native language, like those 18 new sounds Spanish speakers face.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And here's where technology comes into play. The video suggests using Chipit, which I believe is referring to ChatGPT, to generate lists of words that contain the specific sounds you want to work on.
That's so cool. I can definitely see how AI could be a powerful tool for language learning. You can basically create a personalized pronunciation workout tailored to your needs.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth strategy is called learn through examples, which really underscores the value of real-life conversation with native speakers.
Okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. You can practice all you want in isolation, but nothing beats actually using the language in real time.
Absolutely. Charlie emphasizes that conversing with native speakers provides a truly multidimensional learning experience. You're exposed to authentic pronunciation, natural phrasing, and even those tricky colloquialisms we talked about.
It's about immersing yourself in the language as much as possible. But for those who might not have easy access to native speakers, what are some practical ways to create that kind of immersive environment?
The video suggests a couple of really useful options. First, you can join Facebook groups that are dedicated to language exchange. You can find native English speakers who are learning Spanish, and you can help each other out.
I love that. It's a win-win for everyone, and it's amazing how social media can connect people from all over the world who are passionate about language learning.
Another suggestion is attending language exchange meetups,
Okay.
which are becoming increasingly popular in many cities. You can connect with people face-to-face, practice your English in a relaxed setting, and maybe even make some new friends along the way.
It's so inspiring to see how many resources are available to language learners today. You really have no excuse not to dive in and start practicing. So just to recap, the Charlie Way method centers around 4 key skills: sounding native, beautifying your sentences, connecting words and speech, and of course, building that solid foundation of mastering English sounds. And these 4 practical strategies we just discussed, double repetition, the sing-along method, the pronunciation technique, and learn through examples, are designed to help you develop those skills step by step.
It really is like a roadmap to fluency. We've taken the often overwhelming process of learning English and broken it down into manageable steps and actionable strategies that you can implement right away.
Yeah, it's amazing how this method breaks down something as complex as fluency into these clear, actionable steps. And what I find really empowering is that these strategies can be applied to pretty much any aspect of language learning. Whether you're hitting a wall with pronunciation, grammar, or building your vocabulary, there's a technique here to help you overcome those challenges.
You know, one of the most insightful aspects of Charlie's approach is that it encourages a proactive and engaged approach to learning.
Right.
It's not about passively absorbing information, but about actively shaping the language and making it your own.
It's like taking ownership of your learning journey and finding what truly clicks for you.
Exactly. It puts you in the driver's seat of your progress.
Right.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Charlie Way method, what are some key takeaways you think would be most helpful for our listener?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, it's important to remember that language learning is a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
It's about embracing the journey and enjoying those small victories along the way.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's about celebrating those aha moments and recognizing that progress is a series of steps, not just a finish line you cross.
And building on that, I think it's crucial to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to language learning.
Yeah.
It's about experimenting, finding what works best for you,
Right.
adapting these strategies to your own style, and most importantly, having fun with it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about making language learning a joyful and personal experience. And finally, I think the most important takeaway is that the most effective way to learn a language is to actually use it. Get out there and practice. Embrace those inevitable mistakes as opportunities to learn and immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. The more you do that, the faster you'll progress.
It's all about pushing past your comfort zone and embracing the sometimes messy but ultimately rewarding process of learning. So as we leave you to process all of this, I have one final thought-provoking question to leave you with. Could these strategies, the ones we've been discussing today, be applied to mastering any skill, not just language? What if this framework for fluency could be applied to learning a musical instrument, picking up a new sport, or anything else you set your mind to?
That's a brilliant question, and I think the answer is a resounding yes. The core principles of repetition, deliberate practice, and focused attention are universal and can be applied to virtually any field.
So much food for thought. Whether you're tackling a new language, a musical instrument, or any other skill, remember the lessons from the Charlie Way method. Embrace the challenge, find joy in the process, and never stop exploring new ways to learn and grow. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of language learning.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, happy learning.